During the operations in Crete, this officer performed a series of remarkable exploits. In the attack on Malim, he led his platoon forward across open ground, unsupported, against a defense built in depth. When his men were pinned, he went on alone, closing with machine gun posts with pistol and grenades, putting a grenade through a window into a house, firing 2 machine guns, crawling in close to another post, killing the gunners with a grenade. In the withdrawal, he brought wounded out under fire, then rallied men to go back for more. He crossed enemy-held ground to find an isolated company, killed 2 Germans on the way, and brought the company back before it could be cut off. For days, his platoon held an exposed forward position under continuous fire. He was knocked down by mortar blasts, wounded by shrapnel, later shot in the foot, yet remained on duty. At Galatos, he reconnoitered under heavy fire, met the German advance, and drove them back with heavy loss. Ordered to retire, he sent his platoon back, then went forward to warn others they were about to be cut off. Fired on, he feigned death, then with one arm improvised a firing position and killed 2 Germans at close range. At Sfakia, exhausted, he took the high ground, placed his men with a Bren gun, and 2 riflemen drew the enemy into the open. At 500 yards, he shot 22, scattering the rest.
Damn.
Badly fed, wounded, bruised, sick with dysentery, he showed exceptional coolness, skill, dash, and complete disregard for danger, his leadership inspiring his platoon and the whole battalion. So I'm Rejoy, and that, Colin, is the official London Gazette citation for 2nd Lieutenant Charles Upham of the 20th Battalion Canterbury Regiment, 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force, for his first Victoria Cross, as published in the 2nd supplement to the London Gazette dated 14th October 1941, supplement number 35306, and if you want more detail, on pages 5935 to 5936.
Thank you for that detail. And just for everyone else, because I'm a child at heart, I can't help but pointing out to everyone who's listening that dysentery just basically means really bad diarrhea, or if it's left untreated, you will shit yourself to death. So he was doing all that with poopy pants,
Yes.
which is, not the technical term, but it just adds another element and level to it. Like, imagine how sick this poor guy was, and he still drove himself to do that. What a leader, what a man.
And dysentery is horrible. It's horrible. You start shitting blood.
Absolutely.
At the end of it, it's...
Well, I'm Colin, and today on the Rum Ration podcast, we are talking about the Victoria Cross, the highest decoration for valor in the British and Commonwealth tradition. You might have guessed that already for Rejoy's intro. And this episode's for Jay Backer, who heard our Valentine Tank episode, because he's a romantic at heart, and he wanted to spend his Valentine's listening to the Rum Ration. And that's episode 39 for those of you keeping track. And he said he couldn't wait for, and I quote, the swashbuckling, empire-building, no balls, no blue chips podcast on Victoria Day. Well, Jay, this one's for you, and we're even earlier than Victoria Day for you. By the way, Rejoy, before we go much further, and I got a little distracted about poor old Upham with his dysentery, did you say that the citation was for Upham's first Victoria Cross?
Now, that's the amazing part, Colin. You heard right. It was his first Victoria Cross. So Upham's second decoration, the bar to his Victoria Cross, which we'll get into a little bit later, recognized his actions during the attack on El Ruwaizat Ridge. I hope I pronounced that correctly. For Arabic speakers, perhaps they could correct me on that if I'm wrong, which took place on the 14th and 15th of July, 1942, where despite being wounded twice, including in an attack where he used grenades to destroy a truck packed with German troops, I'm just playing that in my mind.
I know.
Good thing, obviously he had a thing for grenades.
He sure did. Too. He wasn't afraid of them.
No, he knew how to use them very effectively. He refused evacuation, stayed with his company. As the fight pressed onto the final objective, he personally knocked out a German tank and several vehicles with...
Guess what?
Grenades!
How many of them was he carrying?
it does kind of make you wonder because, they're not.
No color
and,
sergeant. We're not issuing any of those. I want them all.
and those grenades in those days were much larger and
They
heavier than
were.
what
On
you
those
and I are
guns, they're
used to.
heavy.
So so like my God. So he used more grenades, and even after a machine gun bullet broke his arm,
God damn.
so he's still carrying grenades, and now he's got a broken arm. He's been wounded twice. He continued to lead, fought on through the chaos, and worked to bring back isolated men before his position was ultimately overrun. To date, this is the only instance of a Victoria Cross being awarded twice in the same war to a living recipient, because
Wow.
Captain Upham, as he was at the time, died in 1995.
So he went through all that. I guess probably breaking an arm led to him not being able to use grenades much anymore, because I don't know how you pull the pin.
I don't know how you pull the pin unless the whole Hollywood thing of,
If anyone's ever pulled a grenade, you'd pull your teeth out before you do that.
and whatever's left will blow your head off.
But he did all that, and then he lived another 53 years. Well-deserved retirement.
Well-deserved indeed. Yeah,
incredible.
Quite an amazing feat. So before we get into more stories, and there's so many stories about the Victoria Cross, let's pin down what exactly it is and why it carries so much weight.
That's right. The VC sits in a strange place in history. It's a medal, yes, at the basic description of it, but it's also a verdict, a formal statement that for a moment in a specific place under enemy fire, one person did something so far beyond what could reasonably be asked. I think that's important. Reasonably be asked.
Yes.
And that'll come back when we're talking with Queen Victoria, why she changed the wording. Reasonably be asked. That the only honest response was to record it so it could serve as an example for others.
So true. And that matters because it forces us to confront a hard truth. Wars are made of systems, plans, doctrines, supply chains, politics. Supply chains, we talked about that earlier with the Lee Enfield. It's very dry. But they're lived one decision at a time by people who are tired, frightened, hungry, and yet still expected to function.
The Victoria Cross exists because in the middle of all that machinery, there are moments where the whole thing comes down to a human being deciding whether to move forward, to advance, or to stay, and maybe go back, or pull someone else out. Many troops use the excuse of going to ground when the shooting starts, and then they use that to stay on the ground until the shooting is stopped. And there was a lot of that in D-Day on the British side. It was recorded that oftentimes platoon attacks were going forward. It was the platoon commander, or platoon 2IC, maybe a section commander. So a lot of the troops wrote afterwards in their diaries that they felt ashamed of themselves, that they'd let the leaders go. And there was one of the reasons there was such frighteningly high statistics, or a frighteningly high number of killed and wounded of the leaders, is because they were the only ones carrying the fight to the enemy.
Yeah. And, let's point out that it's not an unnatural response.
No, I think it's quite natural to
hug the ground.
That's towards the chattering machine gun.
That's actually the smart thing to do.
That's what we're hardwired for biologically.
And same instances on Omaha Beach. I mean, can you imagine the withering fire those guys ran into? So you just want to, and so many stories of soldiers saying they just try to dig a hole as deep as possible, which is, what you would normally do. So given that these are the circumstances that these warriors are going into, sometimes the only language that survives those moments is a citation written in, clean official prose, describing something that wasn't clean, wasn't official, and very nearly was not survivable.
Quite often wasn't,
Quite often wasn't. The way I described it was, as dramatic as it may sound, that's the clean version. I can imagine what it was really like, and but far, far worse.
The Victoria Cross itself is earned for, quote, most conspicuous bravery, end quote, or a daring or preeminent act of valor or self-sacrifice or extreme devotion to duty in the presence of the enemy. Yeah,
that last part really hits, doesn't it? In the presence of the enemy. And that's a big thing. It's not theoretical courage. It's not talking about what could happen, what I might do, how do we take out this position over there? It's actually real and happening. It's not the potential of courage. It's actually there. You're in the moment.
And it's courage. The presence of the enemy is key because it could be, there's been many cases of courage and self-sacrifice of sailors when there's the shipwreck going on and they're putting themselves at extreme danger to try and save their comrades. But if they're not in the presence of the enemy, they wouldn't be qualifying for this.
That's right.
So Victoria Cross was instituted by royal warrant on the 29th of January, 1856 by Queen Victoria. And at the time it was quietly revolutionary for one reason that's easy to overlook now in our egalitarian society. It was open to all ranks.
So true. So for the first time, it meant a private could receive the same highest recognition as a general based on a single act, not lineage, which was very important in the British Army back in the day, not education. Not whether someone in your family once knew someone in the right room. That's and, there's no politicking.
Members of the same club. And
nope.
Yeah.
None of all that.
It didn't erase class from the military, obviously. Nothing in the 1850s does that. Please now.
Let's not get carried away.
Let's not get carried away here. But it carved out one small exception, a narrow, deliberate channel where the act mattered more than the person's place in the social pecking order. And for a long time, social order counted for a lot in the British Army. For example, a number of British decorations for gallantry were limited to officers only until the 1993 reform, so not that long ago, made gallantry awards rankless. So the DSO, the Distinguished Service Order, was a military order that pre-1993 was for officers only and typically was usually awarded to majors and above, so senior officers. Military Cross, the MC, was for commissioned officers, captain and below, so subalterns typically, and warrant officers. So that was for the Army, and it was for ground gallantry. Then you had the Distinguished Service Cross for naval officers and warrant officers, and that was for gallantry at sea. And the eligibility expanded over time, but it remained officer and warrant officer restricted until 1993 reforms. And then, of course, you had the Distinguished Flying Cross. So you had the three services represented. You had the DFC for officers, again, and warrant officers for gallantry while flying on active operations.
Yeah. And that social pecking order is an important point because here in this household, Newton, my contrarian cat, considers himself to be top of the heap. And there's an ongoing struggle with that. So although there were counterpart medals for ORs, other ranks, and NCOs, like the Distinguished Conduct Medal, the DCM, the Military Medal, the MM, Distinguished Service Medal, and the Distinguished Flying Medal. I mean, those are all very well recognized medals as well.
So they had a matching one equivalent.
They had a
to
matching one. Yeah. So very often you'll see when these decorations are earned, you have an officer earning, for example, the Military Cross, and his warrant or sergeant who took part in the action with them with equally courageous acts will earn the Military Medal.
Right.
So you see those, but it's the same degree of bravery.
And you also had, it's an easy shorthand for determining, when you look at the post-nominals from someone, particularly from World War I, World War II, if they had risen from the ranks or not, which was relatively rare, particularly in the First World War. And then you've got case of the RMRs, George Burdon McKean, who has got MM, MC, and VC. That's pretty impressive. So military medal when he was a corporal, and then the Military Cross when he was a captain, and the Victoria Cross when he'd been a lieutenant.
I think for military history nerds like ourselves, those are the little things that, excite you, when you see that, like, oh, wait a minute, found something. But the Victoria Cross is in a class of its own.
Absolutely.
It is elite status. So to use today's jargon, not only did it recognize the highest level of gallantry, but it also told the public the empire will honor courage whenever it appears, even when it appears in the people the empire usually overlooks.
That's right. And before we define what the Victoria Cross is, we kind of have to talk about what Britain, and by extension the whole empire, was doing before 1856. Because the VC didn't appear out of nowhere. It wasn't magical that the Queen Victoria woke up one day in end of January 1856 and said, "Damn it, I want a medal." It's just, it was built into a system that already rewarded service, but, just not always the way people imagine. I mean, you had scarves. What's her name? Queen Victoria had been giving away scarves that she would hand knit herself, and those were given for bravery and were highly prized. And a whole bunch of other things.
Well, this is where we separate two things that get mixed up all the time: campaign medals and gallantry recognition. So one says, you were there.
That's right.
Yeah, and there are enough of those. The other says, you did something extraordinary while you were there. Those are not the same things.
Yeah, and you also have the long service medals too, like Canadian
Yes.
Forces decoration. It's always when I'm selling poppies and people, oh, look at your medals. I mean, yeah, this one is for hanging around for 20 years. This one is for going to Bosnia, and this one is for also going to Bosnia. So one I was there, and the other one confirming I was there. The other one confirming that you were there a long time. But campaign medals existed well before the Victoria Cross, and they were about participation. Being present in a war, a theater, a campaign, sometimes with clasps that showed where you've been. Of course, I'm not obviously denigrating.
Yeah, that's not. We're not denigrating it. No,
and
not at all.
Like we were saying about being able to read people's their history. You take one look at someone's medals. I saw a gentleman yesterday, and you could tell, oh, if you know a little bit about the ribbons, you can decode it. So he's been to Cyprus, he'd been to Somalia, he'd been to Afghanistan. You could see by the number of rosettes, and he'd been multiple tours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, they are very important.
Yeah, they are, and let's not. We're not detracting from that at all. It's a record of service, and in today's world, the fact that people are actually doing that, going out there serving for extended tours, it's a huge, huge thing. And we don't mean to take away from that at all. It's just that today we're talking about the Victoria Cross and gallantry and bravery. So you're taking it to another level on top of that. So already you're doing something exceptional, and now you're elevating it to something else. So the campaign medals are, well, it's a military's way of recording service in ink, even if the service itself was written in mud,
or dust,
or dust, or water, pain, discomfort, horror. You'll see big 19th century examples: Waterloo, India, the Sikh Wars, Crimea. These medals mattered. They were important, and they still matter. But they're not, lack of a better term, top shelf award for a single act under fire.
I think a single act is important, because the theater medal went to everybody who served over a certain threshold of time. There's usually a 30-day or 90-day minimum to do. And they're a record of service, not necessarily the record of valor.
Yeah. So, it proves the fact that, for nothing else, that when somebody says, I served, let's say in Bosnia, and you've got the decoration, you say, well, I was there too. So we experience the same sort of things. Now let's talk about the other category. Before the VC, Britain absolutely did have ways of recognizing distinction. I mean, you brought up, Colin, you brought up the fact that Queen Victoria knitted scarves and things, handed those out. But a lot of the most prestigious recognition leaned heavily towards, well, officers, quite frankly, and especially senior officers.
Yeah, and some were also made up and impromptu. They weren't formally recognized. You had, you get the naval gold medal and the army gold medal and gold cross era, and these were legitimate, and they were sanctioned. But you also had naval officers who were being awarded by a grateful nation. They were given a pension of a certain amount. They were given a sword, a very high value sword, like a presentation sword, it was called. You also had other fancy decorations being given. Look at Nelson with that spray of diamonds that he would wear. It was awarded to him for his action to denial, all these kind of things. So these were decorations that were tied to major actions and command success. I think that was a key part of it, the command success, which typically means the guy in charge. And they definitely were not designed to capture the private who did something impossible in a ditch, shitting his guts out with dysentery. They were designed to honor leadership and victory at the top of the structure.
And Nelson's decoration, that must have been a little bit difficult, after all, one-armed, one-eyed, so couldn't see it when he was pinning it on, couldn't pin it on, had somebody do it for him. The cost of valor, Colin, the cost of valor.
Cost of valor.
Now, this isn't nothing. Command decisions do matter.
Of course.
It means the system had a gap. It didn't have one simple, unmistakable, all ranks decoration that said that individual act right there was beyond the expected.
Even when medals were issued to all ranks, like the Waterloo Medal, they still weren't saying, quote, this man did the most extraordinary thing, end quote. They were saying, quote, this man was just part of this moment in history, end quote.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And later you get the retrospective medals like the Military General Service Medal, the Naval General Service Medal, which are important, more inclusive, but again, they're campaign service recognition, not a universal apex award for a single act of, well, battlefield gallantry.
Mhm.
So the question needs to be asked, what was missing?
Well, what was missing was a single, plain, top-tier decoration that could be awarded purely on merit for one act of extreme bravery in the presence of the enemy, and crucially, could be awarded to anyone, regardless of rank.
Exactly. A medal that didn't ask, who are you? Or what is your station? Is your father a duke or an earl?
Right.
Instead, it asked, what did you do when it mattered under fire?
And that's the hole the Victoria Cross was designed to fill.
Yeah. So now that we've established what existed and what didn't, let's talk about what the Victoria Cross actually is and why it's different and why it still carries the weight that it does.
But first, let's take a break for our ever-popular fantasy sponsor segment. When we say ever-popular, it's ever-popular with us. We're not really sure it was ever-popular with listeners, but we think it's pretty popular.
Yes, Newton, my contrary cat.
He hates it.
He hates
absolutely, because he was expecting some royalty payments from it. He's been very disappointed.
We are in litigation.
This episode is brought to you by Pro Valour, Officers Mess Reserve.
Small batch spirit, aged in reclaimed oak and unresolved imperial feelings.
Distilled to an unreasonably high standard, then filtered through the finest Victorian bureaucracy.
Notes of gunmetal, tobacco tin, and the faintest aftertaste of someone saying, regulations.
Perfect for long nights with the Gazette and short mornings with regret.
Pro Valour, for when you've read the citation and you still need a moment.
Enjoy responsibly. Preferably nowhere near a commemorative cannon, real or imagined. Okay.
Here we are.
Here we go. The Victoria Cross didn't just appear out of thin air, as Rejoy mentioned earlier. It was born out of the Crimean War, which was the first major war where media correspondents were reporting straight from the front using this new technology called the telegraph.
Yeah.
And when the Times correspondent, William Russell, started sending his dispatches home, which he could do every day, the British public got a front row view of just how much was being asked of the ordinary soldiers, how much courage, how much punishment, how much sacrifice, and just pure, utter suffering. And a feeling spreads, we're not doing enough to honor this. And in the opening of Parliament in 1854, Queen Victoria acknowledges that mood, paying tribute to the soldiers of her unconquerable army and expressing her admiration and gratitude. And later that year, a member of Parliament, Captain G.T. Scobell, puts the idea into plain language in the House of Commons, and he calls for, quote, that a humble address be presented to Her Majesty to institute an order of merit to be bestowed upon persons serving in the Army or Navy for distinguished and prominent personal gallantry during the present war, and to which every grade and individual may be admissible, end quote. Which is a key phrase there, every grade and individual. In other words, a top-shelf award for valor open to everyone. That's the seed that eventually grows into the Victoria Cross.
Yeah, and once ordinary people read about battlefield courage in the newspaper, you can't unread it. Very similar to what's been happening in modern times. You can't go back to a system where the heroes are invisible because they don't have the right rank. And let's remember, this was a time of Dickens. So social awareness was becoming
literacy also was growing.
Exactly. And so it was a time where reforms were starting to creep into British society as a whole. So the timing was also very, very right for this.
And cynically, a lot of what was being reported by the Times and other journalists at the time was the absolute shit show that the British logistics system, calling it a system would be incorrect, and how badly treated the soldiers were and the suffering that they were undergoing, living in absolute horrible conditions, no food coming in on time, no clean water, no proper medical facilities. Anyone heard of Florence Nightingale? It comes out of this time. It was absolute hell on earth. And I think
abysmal.
And I think that may have motivated the upper classes a little bit to try and distract how terribly they had bungled this war by creating an award like this and doing things like that. So Queen Victoria, with Prince Albert, her husband, insisted that the decoration be simple and egalitarian. No ornate order, no elaborate hierarchy of exclusivity, a plain cross, a short inscription, and a standard that, in theory, could apply to anyone. And she took great personal interest in the actual creation of the cross. And I believe on Hancock's website, they refer to something like 6 or 7 physical samples had been made and rejected by her before she finally signed off in the last example.
Yeah, that's right. For her, it was personal. Um, she was also not unaffected by
Correct.
reading about what
The
was
suffering.
happening,
Yeah.
the suffering of her troops
Yeah.
in the Crimea. And when the war started, just like so many wars before, she had stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace and waved them off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a very famous I think it's a lithograph of the guards, doing the hurrah in front of the balcony as she waves them off to the Crimea. So it was very personal for her, and in that context, she chose for valor
Mm-hmm.
as the motto over for bravery. Now that sounds like wordplay, but it really isn't. Bravery can be personality. Valor is the act. It's measured in risk, intention, and consequence. There is a very big difference between
Very big
the
difference. And the Queen Victoria, the way she explained it when questioned was that she thought that all her soldiers were expected to be brave. So
Yeah.
that was for her, that was the basic common denominator. All her soldiers
Yeah.
were brave.
Yeah.
Just to be a soldier, to stand in line and to receive the musket fire coming at you, or the artillery fire coming at you, the charge of the cavalry, that was just being brave. But as you mentioned, the measured in risk, the intention, and then obviously the consequences
Yes.
of what would happen. Yeah. But as I mentioned earlier, the Victoria Cross was instituted by royal warrant on the 29th of January in 1856. That made it official. And the first awards were backdated to 1854, recognizing Crimean acts. And the first investiture took place in Hyde Park on the 26th of June, 1857, where the Queen decorated 62 recipients.
And that was wonderful. It was a wonderful thing. I mean, it was a public ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, tucked away in some closed room amongst, just an elite
Members
group
of the
people
court,
who were
yeah.
members of the court who were invited. This was a public thing. So this was the empire putting a message on a stage. This is what we will call honor.
Yeah, the VC is a bronze cross pate, often described as a Maltese cross in early wording, but it is not indeed a Maltese cross. And it's wrapped in one of the most enduring military legends, and we love a good legend here, that every Victoria Cross is cast from captured Russian cannon captured at Sevastopol.
See, that's the thing. I mean, I buy into all of the stories.
You're very gullible. That's what I like about you.
And then you explode all the myths. And here we go again, myth busting. But it is the perfect story. I mean, you take the enemy's metal and you turn it into a symbol of courage.
Arr.
But it's almost a little too neat, I suppose.
Yeah, a little too neat. You go, you're so brave, you capture his guns and you melt them down.
Yes,
and you
right
turn them
there.
into medals. Yeah.
Right there on the spot.
For the
Gather
bravest
around,
of the
boys.
brave.
Yes.
And to be fair, the story isn't just pub talk. When the Victoria Cross was originally created, the job of producing the first batch, the 106 specimens, went to Mr. Charles Frederick Hancock, who was the founder of the royal warrant holding firm Hancock's and Company, which he'd established in 1849, which is interesting when you do the math. Hadn't been around very long, like 5 years or so.
No.
He obviously was well connected.
Yes.
They were already known for high-end jewelry and silver that was made in their own workshops, meaning they had the reputation of the craftsmen to produce a new award meant to carry real weight.
Yeah, and here's the remarkable part. No other company has ever supplied the Victoria Cross. Hancock still makes it today. They also state that the bronze, as you said, the bronze for the cannon is supplied by the Central Ordnance Depot at Donington, cut from cannon, captured from the Russians at Sevastopol, and that when new VCs are required, Hancock's requests a fresh piece of that stock from Donington. I mean, how many cannons did they capture in that case? And
they're small little medals. Cannons are big,
But it already the logical brain starts to wonder just a little bit about it.
Yeah, and modern research definitely complicates the picture because in the 90s, there was a definitive investigation and they used X-ray technology to excite the neurons or whatever it is, the protons within the metal, and they determined that looks like they ran out of the original Russian bronze in probably the beginning of 1914, 1915. So, because the medals are made in advance and they're engraved as a winner.
Yes.
So if Rejoy goes out and wins one tomorrow, it's not like we cast a medal just for Rejoy. We take one out of the stock. It's sent back to Hancock's. Hancock's does the engraving, and then it's sent back to the Minister of Defense, who then goes through the process of awarding it. But they ran out, apparently, of the original steel. And it looks like it's coming from some antique guns, a different source of bronze that weren't Russian at all.
No. There's some conjecture they may even be antique cannons captured from the Chinese during the Opium Wars.
Whoops.
So there, it's interesting. We could delve in, just go into another economic podcast here. The rise of the Chinese economy started way back then, by manufacturing metals. But that's a whole different thing. But regardless of where the material is sourced, the VC is an impressive metal indeed. Another detail that fits the whole character of this particular decoration is that it isn't struck like a coin.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike many medals, the Victoria Cross isn't made in a die. You mentioned it earlier, Colin. It's cast. The way that you described it, it's exactly right. Traditionally, it's sand cast in molds that usually produce 4 at a time. So once the metal cools, the cross is pulled from the sand and the real work begins, the hand finishing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, but it's called the lost wax method, which has been around since biblical times, where you create the basically the reverse of what you want design in wax, and that is pressed into the ceramics cooked around it, blah, blah, blah. Then you pour in your molten steel, that melts out the wax, and the molten steel cools into place, and you've got your shape. But even the suspender bar, the part of the cross, the part that the cross hangs from, is cast at the same time and also finished by hand. The details on both sides are hand chased right down to the smallest lines, and at the end, a special bronze finish is applied to give the metal an even color, because the raw bronze isn't especially attractive on its own. And typically, production happens in very small runs, about a dozen VCs at a time.
It's quite an amazing process. I think now it's time to talk a little bit about Canada and the VC. Let's get into that. And Canada's connection to the Victoria Cross is deep. But if you've seen different totals for Canadian Victoria Cross winners, well, it's because sources count Canadian differently, which is a very interesting note. So Ottawa recognizes 81 members of the Canadian Armed Forces who received the Imperial Victoria Cross across the Boer War, the First World War, and the Second World War. Now, other lists cite 94 recipients, and some go up to anywhere between 96 and 99 by including people born in Canada who served in other imperial forces, or non-Canadians who served in Canadian units, like Thomas Dinison, and Newfoundland recipients like John Croke and Thomas Ricketts are often folded in too, even though Newfoundland wasn't a part of Canada until 1949.
So whatever part is convenient to us, we will apply to our history, I guess.
As always.
But Ottawa, so the federal government recognizes 81, right? That's the numbers?
That's right. Yes.
Okay, 81.
Yes.
So let's anchor this with a few figures, not to create a complete roll call, but to show the range of what the Victoria Cross has meant in Canadian hands. And we'll first talk about the first Canadian recipient is Alexander Roberts Dunn, who is recognized for his actions during the Charge of the Light Brigade, speaking of Crimean War. A famous moment, yes, but also a reminder that courage often appears in the worst circumstances: confusion, flawed orders, and lethal momentum. And oftentimes that is where the myth and the legend of the guns that were melted down, it's people think or presume that it was the guns captured by the Light Brigade. They went down and captured those and brought them back, and that's not quite what happened.
No. Yeah. It's a natural assumption, I suppose, but that you're quite right. That's not it. And sometimes, it shows that bravery isn't perfect. Sometimes it's just what people do when the situation, is already broken, right? The next one we'd like to sort of mention is William Nielsen Edward Hall, a Nova Scotian sailor And he becomes the first Black person in the British Empire to receive the Victoria Cross.
Impressive.
Very impressive.
Then we have Ernest Smokey Smith, one of Canada's best-known VC recipients of the Second World War, recognized for fighting that included stopping German armor single-handedly in Italy. And we talked about Smokey in episode 34, which was our special Christmas 2025 episode titled Christmas in Hell, or Tona 1943.
And part of why his story endures is that it fits in the human mind. One man, a weapon, an enemy vehicle, and a decision. Very simple.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality underneath it is never simple. It's training, fear, exhaustion, and the knowledge that if you don't do it, someone else will die.
Yeah, I think that's. I think a lot of this comes down to the fact that they made the conscious decision and they knew what the consequences would be if they either did it or didn't do it.
So right.
Then we had Robert Hampton Gray, a naval aviator. Look at you writing a script and being all diverse by bringing in sailors and air people.
I'm all about diversity.
I've always said that about you. Yeah.
So,
no, wait, I've never said that about you.
No, you. I've never been that way.
Robert Hampton Gray, a naval aviator, receives the Victoria Cross posthumously on the 9th of August, 1945, and he is remembered as the last Canadian to receive the Imperial VC.
And that really hits again, doesn't it? I mean, by then the world is already counting the war's ending. He's flying into fire anyway. The war's over, and generally, and we've read accounts of that. We can talk about later on other episodes how when troops see the war beginning to wind down, they're less inclined to take risks. They want to see the end of it. They want to go back home. They want to resume their lives. And here's this guy flying into fire anyway.
And flying into fire, for everyone who thinks, oh, the nuclear bomb's already been dropped, because the first nuke had been dropped on Hiroshima 3 days prior. And the Japanese clearly weren't giving up yet. And this guy, was killed.
He was killed. And talking of landing with, landing with gravity, or where this thing really hits. Well, this brings us to our second fantasy sponsor ad. There's always a catch. This episode is also brought to you by Hyde Park 57 Investiture Gin, the spirit best served in public, preferably while pretending you're not nervous.
Distilled with juniper, citrus, and the faint pressure of being watched by the entire empire.
Crisp enough for a summer ceremony, strong enough for whatever happened before the ceremony.
Notes of polished brass, damp wool, and a subtle finish of don't drop the metal.
Ooh, Hyde Park 57, because sometimes history comes with a ribbon, and sometimes you need a drink to read the citation.
That's right. And today, now we're coming down to our own beloved, the Royal Montreal Regiment, because we worked it in, a couple of times already, but just to make sure it's clearly in the episode here.
Yeah, here we go, Jay.
Here we go, Jay. Specifically, the 14th Battalion Canadian Expeditionary Force. 2 Victoria Cross recipients, count them, 2, and 2 very different types of courage, but both were absolute.
Oh, absolutely so. And this is important. The VC isn't a single archetype. It doesn't only reward aggression. It rewards what the institution calls valor. And that, we spoke about that earlier on, the word valor. And again, that comes up here. And that includes just things like care under fire. And that's so important.
Yeah, in the presence of the enemy, and conspicuous acts of bravery, right? And I thought it was quite remarkable that 2 out of the 3 recipients who've received it more than once, been awarded it twice, were both doctors, medical officers. And that's where we get to Captain Francis Scrimger, who served as the 14th Battalion RMR's medical officer at the Second Battle of Ypres, April 1915. During the gas attacks, there was shelling, confusion, mass casualties, and there's a quiet thread here that feels almost unreal. John McCrae, who was the Canadian medical officer who wrote In Flanders Fields, which most people are aware of as a very epic poem, he had once taught Scrimger at Montreal's Royal Victoria Hospital, where both of my sons were born, by the way, at Ypres. They were both running dressing stations in the same sector, and I visited the dressing station that McCrae, where it's been reproduced as a tourist spot now, and you can go visit where it was part of the grave and commemorations on the Western Front.
Yeah.
And before Scrimger left for England, he had stopped in at McCrae Station near Saint-Julien. Scrimger later told his family that McCrae showed him an early discarded draft of his poem In Flanders Fields, and Scrimger urged him to publish it.
Mm-hmm.
They're both part of the same McGill medical network overseas, tied through units like the number 3 Canadian General Hospital. So Scrimger's Victoria Cross sits between two realities a bit. The brutal courage of staying with the wounded under fire, and the almost accidental moment when in Flanders Fields nearly died on a scrap of paper in a dressing station because McCrae was initially unhappy with the draft and he discarded it.
If only somebody from Netflix was listening to this.
That's right.
We'd be very happy. We'd be very happy to talk about rights for a miniseries
or even just sponsorship.
We're not fussy. Well, this isn't heroism that looks cinematic. It's a dressing station coming apart, men choking, wounds that you can't fix fast enough, the world narrowing to triage and brutal decisions. I mean, we covered it in our earlier episodes about Ypres and how brutal it really was. And as if treating the wounded under fire wasn't enough, Scrimger may also have saved one of the war's most defining poems, not just the war, but war in general, by pushing McCrae to publish In Flanders Fields. Honestly, that's practically a second citation in its own right.
Right. And this is an interesting fact here is that, and I think this is probably the case for a lot of these medals, is either you charge them for disobeying orders or you you decorate them with the highest medal for bravery, because Scrimger's act of valor is rooted in refusal. He keeps treating the wounded while the position is being destroyed. He had been ordered to evacuate, and he stays. He moves men out of danger. He does not abandon them. On April 25th, the Second Battle of Ypres, his dressing station, which was lovingly known as Shell Trap Farm,
evocative,
which I think was it 300,000 rounds of ammunition that they had packed and hit. They were putting the wounded on stretchers on top of the crates of ammunition.
Needs must.
Needs must. Well, I'm sure it was a good idea until the shells started landing.
Where do we put the ammo?
It's under all the wounded. It's under all the wounded. Awesome. It took direct shell fire. Ordered to the rear, he refused. He treated men under fire, and he kept working in a farmhouse that was packed with casualties, as I mentioned, who were on stretchers perched on ammo crates. We covered that pivotal battle and Francis Scrimger's actions in our episode 13, RMR Ypres, and it's the context of why Scrimger's refusal became a Victoria Cross.
Yeah, there you've got bravery and valor rolled into one in incredible ways for all of those guys that were there, actually.
And he did carry an officer out. I think the specific act that he got the VC for was carrying out a Captain or Lieutenant MacDonald, I believe the name was. And when the shelling came down, he was, and Scrimger's a small guy, and carrying him out, he would put him down. He wrapped his body around MacDonald's head to try and protect him from the shell fire. That's pretty wild.
Quite incredible. I kind of also wonder, I mean, the poor guy who's on a stretcher on top of an ammunition crate. Maybe
I'm sure most of them didn't know because they've just been dragged in there. But for sure that one of those guys like, I just packed up I'm the one who unloaded all that ammunition in there. Right, I don't want to go in there. No.
Excuse me. And Captain Scrimger is described as the second Canadian in the First World War to receive the VC. Interestingly, in the same battle, Second Ypres, that was where young Fred Fisher of the 13th Battalion, our sister battalion, the Black Watch of Canada, earned the first VC awarded to a Canadian in the First World War, where he if I remember correctly, in the circumstances, he manned his
Colt machine gun with the RMR crew. He was the only. He was a Black Watch. They used a Colt machine gun from the RMR, and all his gunners have been killed. And back then, you needed a crew of 8, and he'd come back and ask for volunteers. And there's 8 RMRs that went out with him, and
they stayed.
They stayed. All were killed except for him, and he was killed by shell fire the next day. But he probably himself single-handedly stopped the German advance. And he came originally from Ontario. He graduated high school at the Westmount High School, and which is just down the road from the RMR. And there is a beautiful oil painting and a memorial to him in the school when you go there. So a remarkable young man. He was 19 years old. 19.
If you can imagine that, 19, and that is a very famous painting of him behind the gun. It's I think every kid who's interested in military history, I certainly was. That's one of the first I saw. I remember, and just being it captures everything.
And then
about
from
it.
that youth, that bloom of youth, we go to an ancient, old, broken man of 25, Captain George Burdon McKean, who was a scout officer for the RMR, and he earned his Victoria Cross during a trench raid near Gavrelle in April 1918.
Yeah, and this is the other pole of the
Yeah.
VC.
This is the yang to the yin.
We're talking about violent initiative in close combat.
And I think he liked it.
I think he did.
Really liked it.
I think he really did. So trench raiding is intimate warfare, and I think we've spoken about that in the past, and that might be worth exploring in its own right. An episode on trench raiding.
Yeah,
but
it'd be a good idea.
It'd be good. This is planned aggression in darkness,
Big
where leadership is not theory here. It's whether the men follow you into a place, they can't see. And hopefully they are following you when you turn around and say, come on, boys, here we go. And, you're not alone.
So you're not kidding about them not being able to see. Like, they would be crawling up through the lines at night, get ready at the lip of the German trench on the command go. They'd all jump into a fucking trench they couldn't see and then start killing anything that they ran into. Hopefully not each other.
And here's the other thing, Colin. I mean, people don't talk about this enough, I think. Those trenches are deep.
Oh, yeah.
Just jumping in, you could injure yourself quite badly.
Absolutely. 8, 10 feet down.
Even if it's empty.
Yeah.
You land badly, your ankle's gone.
Yeah.
So.
And he was wounded, but he still pressed through. He took trench blocks. He took prisoners. McKean's courage is about forward momentum when stopping would be safer, more sensible, and more survivable.
Like we talked about earlier. I mean, the natural instinct is, I don't want to die here, but you keep going. So we've got the two archetypes, Scrimger, care under fire, McKean, attack under fire. Both are valor because both are choices made in conditions designed to break choice.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to try and pull up McKean's the citation because it reads like an adventure novel. It's unbelievable. Like while wrestling with the first German, he stabs the second, simultaneously shooting a third. He was a one-man killing machine.
Fended off the bear mascot that the German regiment had in the trench.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, a Victoria Cross can be awarded twice, as we talked about at the beginning, the example of Upham that you used, and signified by a bar, like any other medal is awarded twice, like a Victoria Cross with bar or things like that. And only 3 men in history have earned it.
And the thing is, when you hear that, you shouldn't just say, "Oh, yeah, that's cool." That it's far more than that. You should really, what you should be asking yourself and thinking is, what did it cost them to be in that category?
Yeah, because 3 out of more than 1,000 that have been awarded, right? So you had Arthur Martin Leake, who was a medical officer, Boer War and the First World War. Then you had Noel Godfrey Chavas, who was a doctor and an Olympic athlete. Come on, dude. Save some for the rest of us. Twice in the First World War, and his headstone bears 2 Victoria Cross engravings. And then Charles Hazlitt Upham, who we already mentioned in great detail, from New Zealand, who, when we opened the episode with, he was unique as the only non-medical combat officer to receive a VC and bar Crete in 1941 and El Alamein in 1942, which is also known as the Desert Stalingrad or?
Yes, that's right.
Tunisgrad is the nickname.
Tunisgrad, yes. Yeah, Little Stalingrad was Ortona.
Yes, that's right. Sorry.
Which we talked about earlier. But the funny thing about Upham's citation, it's like, a staff officer sitting there reading this going, this is unbelievable. This is a movie. This can't be true. It's the official language is struggling to keep up with the fact that, well, this guy just simply refused to stop.
He just won't stop.
You just took bags of grenades. I don't need the rifle. I don't need the rifle, mate. Just give me a bag of grenades. And off he went. That was it.
Was that your New Zealand accent?
See, pretty good, eh?
Yeah. Was it intermixed with Peruvian? Is that what you're going with? Or?
Well, the Peruvians are known to be a very martial people.
Sure, a lot of sheep. Both countries. Yeah. Between 1861 and 1908, 8 men had their VCs forfeited for crimes such as theft, assault, or bigamy. The Empire tried briefly to claim it could give honor and then take it back.
We have to address these things, don't we? It's not all just laurels and accolades. There's also there's a certain element involved here at times. And then came the correction. In 1920, King George V declared that a man should be allowed to wear his VC on the scaffold, even if condemned for murder.
I think that's a
So,
great expression. I really commend the king for doing that. And it's interesting you see that you've actually had
yeah,
to have royal intervention twice to A,
yeah,
to get it instituted, and B, to get it corrected that you can wear it forever.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But the meaning is brutal but clear. The VC is awarded for a specific act. It's not a lifetime purity test. It's not
That's
sainthood.
right. Yeah, yeah.
It's not like we're selecting from within the ranks of the local choir boys. This is a recorded moment of valor that can't be erased by what comes after.
I think, especially today, we understand that a lot better than perhaps they did in earlier times, with the mental health issues that come with being exposed to that kind of trauma all the time. And as you rightly said, Colin, I mean, not choir boys.
Yeah,
They performed incredible acts that saved lives. And then what happens afterwards is something else.
that's right.
But you can't take that away from them. Um, so doesn't excuse anything. It
Yeah.
just separates the deed from the later life because, well, war produces complicated people, and medals don't make them simple. You can't put them in a box and
No,
say, this is who this person is, and then be
no.
shocked if different things happen. So on that note, it's time for our final fantasy sponsor segment. And here we should acknowledge the real enemy in every honor system, paperwork. Which is why this episode is brought to you by London Gazette Proof Rum.
Triple distilled and officially published, because if it isn't in the Gazette, it didn't happen.
No, sir. Aged in oak, sealed with bureaucratic indifference, and finished with a crisp note of supplement attached.
Tastes like molasses, gunmetal, and a clerk quietly judging your handwriting.
London Gazette Proof Rum, for when the story is unbelievable, the citation is understated, and you need something strong enough to survive the footnotes.
Please enjoy responsibly. Side effects may include shouting "for valor" at inanimate objects and long-suffering spouses. The VC becomes exceedingly rare in the modern era.
Yeah.
If anything, it kind of goes back to the pre-World War I times, because World War I was quite an industrial output of just absolute carnage and the millions of men it served. So obviously it went up, and same thing in World War II. But only 15 Imperial VCs have been awarded since 1945.
Indeed, that's partly because, well, the standard, quite frankly, is
It's pretty high.
extremely brutal.
Yeah.
And partly because modern states have different ways of awarding honors now, different wars, different politics, and frankly, different appetites for myth.
Australia created its own VC in 1991, New Zealand in 1999, and Canada created a Canadian Victoria Cross in 1993 using the Latin pro valore, which sounds much more impressive, but really it's an easy way to
Same
get around
thing.
the bilingualism, right? Because it's Latin.
I hadn't thought about that. That's
Yeah.
right. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so that's the main reason we did it. And it's cast from a blend that includes traditional gunmetal and metals from regions across Canada, including a special medal that had been cast for Confederation in 1867 and authorized also by Her Majesty Queen Victoria.
Wait, hold on. You're saying there are no Crimean cannon?
Well, there is parts of it. The traditional, that's where the traditional gunmetal comes from. Like there's a
And the
little
opium
piece-
cannon?
Well, it's probably more the opium cannon than the non-opium cannon. But if you look at the cover art for this episode, you'll see it's a Canadian VC, and the design incorporates on the little laurel there, incorporates the Irish shamrock, the English rose, the Scottish thistle, and the French fleur-de-lis. And we should note that no Canadian has received it yet, which is a hotly charged political issue that we are not going to touch with a barge pole in this podcast.
No.
Because as we like to remind our listeners and occasionally ourselves, this is a history podcast, not a politics podcast.
That is very, very true. So the Victoria Cross changes the story the society tells itself about merit. It says the highest recognition is not reserved for the people with the most status, but for the people who, in the most dangerous conditions imaginable, put themselves in harm's way.
It also broadens the definition of heroism. It's not only the offensive act, it's endurance, leadership, care, returning for the wounded, holding the line, when the line is breaking, and acting when fear would be the rational choice.
Yeah, we spoke about that earlier as well. Fear is definitely the rational choice, but you go beyond that. And maybe that's the core reason we keep circling back to it. Because the VC is a reminder that history is not just strategy and statesmanship. It's human beings making choices when the cost is immediate and real.
VC doesn't make war noble. It doesn't redeem war, but it does record something rare that under the worst pressure, some people still choose responsibility.
And that's worth understanding, Colin, especially today, I think. Not to romanticize it, but to see it clearly for what it is.
So that's our episode on the Victoria Cross. And just to make sure that we were properly outfitted for it, if you notice the color of the ribbon when you look at the cover art, obviously it was inspired by looking into the future. Queen Victoria knew that there would be an amazing podcast called the Rum Ration, which would use,
That's right.
We'd have the same
That's
color
right.
shirts and
That's
hats
right.
and all
Yes.
this good stuff, courtesy of Rejoy. But that's it today. We talked about the Victoria Cross, its origins, its myths, the Canadian aspect, of course, and the 2 RMR recipients who show just how wide
Yes.
the idea of valor can be.
Yes. If you listened and thought, this is heavier than I expected, good. It should be. Because a medal like this isn't a fun fact. It's a ledger entry that's written in blood.
Please subscribe, leave a review, share the episode with someone who thinks military history is only dates and generals.
Yeah, because it isn't. It's people, and sometimes it's people at the very limit of what we ask a person to do. So until next time,
Cheers to
cheers
history.
to history.